Hey there, students. Tom Richey here, and we are here for the third broadcast of the Bill of Rights Institute's AP Preparedness series. Now, of course, we've gotten a lot of very interesting announcements from the College Board recently that we don't want to ignore. My original plan for this session was to go over how to write a DDQ for early national America and the American Revolution. And I don't think that's going to be necessarily the best thing to do this evening. Okay. So, speaking of, somebody said Roosevelt killed elephants. Let's go ahead and get to the elephant in the room. Although we want to focus on preparing for the exam content wise, there may be some questions from y'all about the exam itself. If y'all aren't necessarily, knowing exactly what's going on, that's something y'all can go ahead and ask me those questions. Okay, so if anybody's got questions about the APUSH exam, now I can tell you, Addie, what's not going to be on the APUSH exam. So y'all bring the questions in, and I'll answer them the best I can. That the so-called periods 8 and 9, basically post-World War II, will not be on the AP exam. Okay, so as far as, an atomic bomb blows up, another one blows up a few days later, World War II is over, so is APUSH. Okay, so anything from 1491 to 1945 is going to be on the exam. Anything 1945 on is not going to be on the exam. That is correct, Mel, that we are hearing that there is not going to be multiple choice. Okay, so we have been told there is not going to be a multiple choice portion on this exam. Okay, so that is correct. Now, as far as that goes, we are told that it's going to be in terms of about 45 minutes. Now, we're not expecting exactly 45 minutes, but at the same time, we're expecting somewhere around 45 minutes, which leaves the most popular expectations that people have. I mean, the only ones that make sense at this point would be perhaps that you would get an LEQ or a choice of 3 LEQs, and or you could get a short answer section. Okay, so we'll be looking large, most likely at either SAQs, which seems to be what most people think so, and then possibly so LEQ or SAQ. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. Now, the other thing is April 3rd, they're going to make an announcement about the exact composition of the exam. So what we want to think about in terms of until then, content is always going to be king, okay, or queen. We're in the 21st century, right? So whatever you're doing to get content, you're going to be gold, okay? So focus on reviewing as much as you can, okay? Now, as far as that goes, when we think about, people are asking, okay, so they've taken units 8 and 9 off of the exam, and then the College Board is offering some live events that are focusing on units 8 and 9. Now, this isn't necessarily what people are looking for right now. People aren't thinking like, oh yeah, I want to take a class on units 8 and 9. But the College Board, what they're doing, somebody was telling me the rationale for this, and the rationale is that they just want students who want to finish the course, that they are going to be able and have that opportunity to finish the course. When you think about this, that if you're thinking about, post 1945 U.S. history, some of this stuff can also be useful if you are taking, AP European history, for example. So this is just one of those things that the College Board wants to make sure that you have access to the complete course. Now, after they do about a week of units 8 and 9, I think that they're going to be moving toward review. Okay. And of course, I'll be doing review as well with the Bill of Rights Institute through my own channel and through, my friends at Marco Learning. So what we're seeing here now, we can talk about how fair or unfair it is, but this is going to be the, that's going to be it is going to be what it is. And if you're prepared, I think you're going to do fine. Okay. Now, the other thing that we're hearing are things about possibly there being open notes. Now, don't put too much stock into that. Okay. Because if you're taking a timed test and you're consulting notes, you are shooting yourself in the foot. So you may think like, oh, that sounds like something that's going to be great. But at the same time, I would not get too overconfident in that. Okay, you wouldn't get too overconfident in that. So going from there, does anybody have any questions when we think about the Constitution and the Articles? Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I need to find. Let's see, LEQ. Okay, so let's see, actually, I've got so here's the thing. LEQs are not gone yet. Okay, so we don't know. I mean, there may be an LEQ. It could be a collection of SAQs, but let's see. All right. So I'm going to pull a few things up here. And this, setting up this LEQ is going to be relevant no matter what. Okay. It's going to be relevant even if we end up being in a situation where there's not an LEQ on the exam. This is still going to be current. Okay. So let's go ahead and kind of think about how it is that I go about setting up LEQs. Now, we looked at a causation LEQ last time. Okay. So that's something that we did last time. This time, I want to look at a comparison LEQ. And one of the things that we're going to have to look at is in terms of, comparing two things, noting similarities and differences. Okay. Now, a few things. Okay, now some of y'all are asking, Davis, you've got a great question, but I don't know if it's necessarily something that I can answer definitively. Now, there is some skepticism floating around as to whether whether colleges and universities will accept these. Okay, now the thing is, we are living in some very strange times. Okay, that I have never I'm thinking in terms of. I am nearing 40 years old, and there's never been a time where I have been out of school for 6 weeks. South Carolina, for example, the governor has just ordered schools closed through the end of April. Okay, so schools are going to be closed through the end of April. This has never happened in my lifetime. I mean, this is, really in any of our lifetimes, it is an unprecedented thing. Like the closest thing that we can think of to this is the Spanish flu. And if somebody was alive during the Spanish flu, they are, now over 100 years old. So this is something, we don't know. Now, normally would a college or university be thinking, we're hesitant to give credit for that? Sure. But then again, what you've got to think about is the colleges and universities right now, they are also giving credit under terms that they would not probably have been okay with not too long ago. Okay, so college students are going to be taking finals. So that's something that, they're going to be taking finals online. So it's something that everybody's going to have to adjust to. I think as a student, what you need to do is just focus on preparing for the exam, do the best you can, and, let the powers that be handle it from there. Now, will parts of the exam be based on each period? Now, Rich, what we want to understand now, if it's an SAQ set, I imagine that the test makers will draw the SAQs from different periods, just like they already do. Like if you look at any SAQ set that's been on the exam, they are drawing from different periods. Okay, so that's something that I think that, we are going to see it drawn from different periods. If you end up getting a choice of 3 LEQs and you get to pick one, then you are getting the option of choosing which period you want to be assessed on. So again, we don't know. The most likely options right now would be a single LEQ, like a choice of 3, like they normally give you, or an SAQ set, both of which have advantages and disadvantages. So, we'll find out more about that later. Now, as far as that goes, Emily, this is one thing that you want to note here. When we talk about the LEQ, and good, let's go ahead and transition to the content of the exam. And I certainly certainly don't mind spending a few minutes at the beginning of each broadcast talking about what's going on with the latest exam news, because that's important for y'all to hear that. But let's go ahead and focus on how to do best on the exam. Now, do we get a choice between causation, comparison, or continuity and change over time? Yes, you do. Now, as far as that goes, all three of the prompts are going to be worded the same way. Now, there is one prompt format, like the prompt format that we looked at last time, that prompt format, lends itself better to causation or continuity and change over time. You get to decide for any prompt, okay? You can decide, do you want to employ comparison, causation, or continuity and change over time? So you get to decide that, but we want to note that some prompts are going to be easier to do one thing for than others. Now, one thing that I want to note is that from my experience and the experience, most teachers say the same thing, that comparison of the three historical thinking skills, comparison is going to be the best one. Okay. So, I mean, as far as the best one, I mean the easiest. That it's like, okay, you've got A, you've got B, tell me the similarities and differences and whether, they were more similar than different or more different than similar. That's really not a very it's not a difficult thing to do. Now, when it comes to causation, okay, then you're going to be basing your thesis on cause and effect relationships. This was the most important cause. Here was another cause that wasn't necessarily as important, but still needs to be considered. That's what we're looking at causation. Now, continuity and change over time, it's something that's certainly doable. I usually find that with students, that is the most difficult, okay? Because you've basically got a period. How is it at the beginning? How is it at the end? And how did things change and stay the same? Did it change more than it stayed the same? It just gets a little bit complicated. Now, from my experience, just about like every prompt that I've ever seen, you can employ causation or comparison. And seeing that I believe that those two are easier than continuity and change over time, I tend to focus on the causation essays and the comparison essays. I think that continuity and change over time is just a little bit much, and there's no prompt that I've ever read that forces you to do continuity and change over time. Okay, that you can find a way to do comparison really with any of them. But the thing is that there is a prompt type that lends itself to comparison. So if you see this prompt type, I would write a comparison-oriented essay. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen with you here. And let's take a look at this prompt. Evaluate the extent which the role of the federal government under the Articles of Confederation differed from its role under the Constitution in the period 1777 to 1800. Okay. Now, as far as that, goes, now what they might do here is, now this, somebody could do this as a continuity and change over time. You could go to the end of the So this is an example of how flexible you can be. So you could write an essay going over like this growth of the federal government, okay, that basically, here's the Declaration of Independence and, the sovereignty and rights of the states. And then the role of the federal government is shifting with the Constitution as a turning point, okay? That's one thing that a lot of times if you're writing a CCOT essay, you want to think about, like, where is the turning point? So I could turn this into an essay about, like, let me start off with the Declaration of Independence and Parliament taxing the colonies, maybe as context, the Intolerable Acts or something like that. And then I go through and I discuss how the federal government is growing, but at the same time, we do have this system of federalism. So let me show you how I would set this up, because I want you, even though I typically don't recommend CCOT, because I think that it's a little much for a lot of high school students when they could do one of the others. You certainly want to consider what you might do here. Okay, so if we think about the beginning. Okay, so the articles, so basically thinking about the beginning and the end. Okay, so we're thinking about the beginning and the end, and the beginning under the articles, where we're going into state, so basically we're starting with state sovereignty and a limited federal government, right? So we look at this, and then we look at the end. We've got the Constitution, okay, and then we see a balance, between the state and federal governments, right? So state and federal governments, and then we would look here, a stronger central government. Now we could say the limited federal government, that mostly foreign policy, like 90% of the federal government's powers, the powers of the Congress, most of the powers, 90% really had to do with foreign policy outside of things. Okay, now what we could say is the whole time we do see a trend in the growth of the power of the central government. Okay, now we can also note, if we're thinking about continuity, we can see here that there is there's still federalism. Okay, so federalism was federalism, states' rights. Okay, this was something of a constant. Okay, so you can go into that. Now, that is one way that we could start framing this thing, that we have this kind of story from the beginning to the end. Now, what I would do here on something like this, anytime you can make a comparison, I think make it comparison. Okay, so when I think about that, I'm more likely going to frame it as something like this. Okay, so if we're thinking about here, that, let's see, let me insert, okay, yeah, insert rows above. All right, so as far as that stuff, we're looking at the articles and the Constitution. Okay, so the articles and the Constitution. Now, when we think about this, there are some things that are, okay, so I've got a sample here. Now, the thing is, though, when we look at the articles, that's going through part of this, and then the Constitution, we've got a military alliance. We don't have taxing power, right? So those are some things here, that the federal government did not have control over interstate commerce. Okay, so so the commerce power stayed with the states. Okay, so the commerce power stayed with the states, like over all commerce. Okay, control of commerce, trade, and commerce powers. Now, Commerce Clause, remember, it applies only to interstate commerce. Okay, so now here we see a stronger central government. Okay, now, and again, similar to what we said here, I mean, it's really in terms of how you frame your argument, because a lot of the same stuff is going to happen here. Okay, so when we think about the articles and the Constitution, okay, so we see that there are, in both cases, federalism, okay, federalism, states' rights, they both had a Republican form of government. Now, sometimes, so even, I've got, sometimes I'll do this when I'm making notes, just to make clear to students, we're talking about small r republicanism. You wouldn't, so when we talk about small r republicanism, we're making it clear that we're talking about the philosophy of republicanism, in the sense that we're all Republicans, in the sense that we all believe in a Republican form of government. Remember that Thomas Jefferson, in his first inaugural address, he famously said, "We are all Federalists, we are all Republicans." Now, when Jefferson said this, he didn't mean that we're all members of the Federalist Party. or were all members of the Republican Party. What he meant is that, we all believe in a federal system of government that divides powers between the central government and state governments. We all believe in a Republican form of government, a government that is accountable to the people, and a government that is governed by elected representatives who work on behalf of the people. Okay, so essentially here you've got to then have a thesis. When you make your thesis statement, you've got to think about, are they more similar than different, or are they more different than similar? Now, with that, let me just go. Okay, so as far as that goes, okay, David, let's make this very clear. I'm glad that you asked this question. Do I mean national and not federal in the prompt? Actually, no. Okay, what we want to note, especially in this period, we want to note that the United States, and you'll get this when you take AP Government. If you take AP Government next year, then the United States does not have a unitary government. So when we look at the ratification of the Constitution, when we look at the Anti-Federalists, for example, what the Anti-Federalists said, they said that, the Constitution should not be ratified because it's going to create a national government. Now, when we talk about a national government, that is a government where, you have a national government and then regional governments, okay, that you don't have any protections for the states, for example. Like basically, if you go to France, for example, you go to France, for example, then you go to a place that doesn't have, it has regional governments, but the regional governments don't have sovereignty. Okay, when we talk about sovereignty, then we're thinking about, does the federal government have complete control over everything? So, for example, let's talk about how federalism works, okay? And where James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, they wrote the Federalist Papers. Now, the Federalist Papers argue that the government created by the Constitution is not fully a national government, that it does not destroy the rights of the people or the rights of the states, that it is both federal and Republican in nature, whereas the Anti-Federalists argued that the Constitution is neither federal nor Republican. So when we think about, for example, like the Real ID Act, I have got, I think, until October to get a new driver's license. Now, I can continue to use my South Carolina driver's license, which I don't think, if I cover up the, I'm holding my driver's license. Okay, I'm covering up the number and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'll just have it here. So I'm holding my state driver's license. Now, my driver's license expires in 2026, May 7th, 2020, or wait, actually, no, on my birthday. Okay, August 7th, 2026. So for purposes of being in my state and driving around and kind of doing my thing, I can continue to use this driver's license until 2026. Now, the problem I'm going to run into is if I try to board an airplane, okay? Because what happens here is the federal government passed the Real ID Act. And they said that you are going to have to, in order to board an airplane after October of this year, you are going to have a real ID, which means that your state ID is going to have to meet certain requirements that are mandated by the federal government if you want to fly. Now, here's the thing. Air traffic is interstate commerce, and that's something that's controlled. We have 51 federal, let's see, streaming. Oh, it should still be streaming live, right? Okay, so there's something on my screen. I think everything's still good, or is it? Okay, let's see. Did I freeze? Okay, it says that I am back. Okay, let's see. It says that I'm back. Let's see about this. Okay, everything is good. Okay, so I'm back. Everybody says they can see me now. Excellent. Okay, so we should see me coming. I'll see myself on the YouTube screen. It is all Gucci, as the kids like to say. Okay, so as far as that goes, at some point I was interrupted. Okay, so in terms of that our government divides federal authority from state authority. Okay, so it's just like no matter what state you're in, if you see road work, for example, like if we think about James Madison's veto of John C. Calhoun's bonus bill, remember Henry Clay's American system was National Bank, Internal Improvements, Protective Tariff, NIP. Okay, so the American system, all right, is something that was, this is something that is, trying to advocate for internal improvements. Well, James Madison saw, Calhoun's bonus bill, which, Calhoun will later on become a big fan of states' rights. But this bonus bill gave the federal government like authority to construct like, roads, bridges, canals, internal improvements that would only impact a certain state. Now there is like, you look at like the Cumberland Road, for example. There was this federal road that was constructed very early on, Cumberland Road. So that was something that the national road, this is something the federal government did because this was obviously interstate commerce. But as far as giving the states money to improve their own roads, James Madison felt like it's a good idea, but it's not in the Constitution. It's not until after the Civil War that we start to see like massive spending on internal improvements projects. But even today, when the federal government, says, the interstate highway system, for example, the federal government passed the legislation authorizing the interstate highway system. But every time we see road work, okay, every time we see road work being done, we always see state highway workers doing the road work. Okay, so that's something that we want to understand in terms of when we're looking at the differences between the federal and state governments and the powers that are divided, because the states retain some sovereignty. And so with that, let's go ahead and take a look at some approaches that we could take here. Okay, so when we're looking at some approaches, if we wanted to contextualize, okay, there are a number of things that we could do to contextualize here. Okay, so depending on what you're wanting to do here, could be anything from, basically anything from the, from the American Revolution, from the, I would say the period between, no, the period, period between the the French and Indian War and the Declaration of Independence. Okay, that illustrates, illustrates why Americans were hesitant to create a strong central government. Okay, so basically we're looking for some specific stuff here that's going to get into why is it that Americans were so were so wary of a strong central government. So what I've done here in this sample essay, okay, so we've got, let me go ahead and condense that so you can see everything here. Okay, so we can argue either that the Constitution was, very different from the Articles, or we can say that the Constitution, the Articles are still, that they've got more in common than they don't. Okay, because when we think about this as well, that when we think about control over foreign policy, okay, so control over foreign policy, did not change. Now, sometimes it's difficult because typically when we're teaching, we might focus on the differences. When we're teaching and learning and comparing, I think there's a natural tendency to focus on the differences. But in this case, you want to make yourself think about what's similar. So when we're learning about the Constitution, the Articles, we're always hearing about the Commerce Clause, the taxing power. Three branches of government. Okay, so you look at a unicameral Congress. Okay, and then we see here three branches of government. So all kinds of things here that we can get onto. I didn't do what I didn't do there. All kinds of things that we could do here, but it's up to you whether you're going to emphasize the similarities or emphasize the differences. And with what I've got here, I can choose either one of those as, to emphasize. So what I've done with my thesis is I've said here, although the Constitution created a stronger central government than had existed under the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution still reserved many powers to the states and was not a fundamental departure from the Articles. Okay, so what I'm noting here is I'm saying, like, look, there are some differences, okay, but the Constitution was not a fundamental departure. We want to get into the degree, so evaluate the extent. So what I'm saying here is, yeah, to some extent, to some extent, there is a difference, but it's not a fundamental departure because it has a lot in common. Now, what I've done with the contextualization, now, when I write contextualization, of course, I teach this, I do this for a living, so sometimes it'd be kind of easy for me, right? But typically contextualization, I would recommend at least 2 to 3 content-rich sentences. Now, I recommend also a little bit of overkill, okay? If you write 4 or 5 sentences and they're all content-rich, now I'm not talking about fluff, but I'm talking about content-rich sentences. If you've got 5 good content-rich sentences that go into specifics that basically give the reader at least as much as they get at the beginning of a Star Wars movie, that's what you want to think about. When you're being set up to watch a Star Wars movie, then that's what you're considering, okay? So consider that in terms of, whether you're giving enough, and I tend to go for overkill with contextualization. Now, if you've written the better part of a page on contextualization, I'd say, whoa, slow down. If you've got normal handwriting, of course, we may be typing this test this time, it may not be a written test this year, right? So, all right. So with that, may not be a written test this year, but it don't go too much, okay? But I do think that when it's a certain standard to meet the point, 2 things, kind of like if you're on the track team or cross country or something like that, when you're running to the finish line, you don't slow down before you get to the finish line, right? You run through it, okay? So when you see my contextualization here, typically I'm showing you something that I think is really good. I don't want to show you bare minimum contextualization, because if I show you this, you're probably going to do that, which means if I show you that, then you're going to do that, okay? So that's not what we want. So after the French and Indian War, Parliament abandoned its long-standing policy of salutary neglect and proceeded directly tax the 13 colonies without the consent of the colonists' representatives. The British government cracked down on the enforcement of the Navigation Acts in order to control trade according to mercantilist economic policies. The proclamation line kept colonists from moving west into the lands that were won by the French and Indian War. After the American Revolution, many Americans were reluctant to give power to a government outside their states, which resulted in a very weak federal government under the Articles of Confederation. However, this government proved to be too weak to support the economy, keep the peace, and build a strong military. So what I've done here is I've looked at the whole revolutionary experience, and I've used this to explain. So notice here I've got the Navigation Acts, the end of salutary neglect, the proclamation line, okay, then going into into basically the effect of that. Okay, so Americans were hesitant to give up that power. I'm establishing context. This is about the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, but I'm establishing context here. And the context logically leads to my thesis statement. And if you do this, then you have gotten into, you have gotten 2 points out of the 6 on the LEQ in one paragraph. Now, the other thing is, in the likely event that we see an SAQ exam, we don't know till April 3rd, but in the likely event that we see an SAQ exam, then what we're going to have to think about in those terms is with the SAQs, always use a piece of specific evidence. Always back it up. Okay, whatever you say, always back it up. So let me go in. I'm just going to run in on the chat for a little bit, just see if anybody's got some questions or anything like that. All right. T has been around for a long time, Divvy. Okay, so we've got y'all are having some fun there. Yeah, so T, that goes, yeah, definitely people been drinking tea for a while, ever since the Columbian Exchange. Okay, so now Michael asks a good question. Okay, now technically, like on the rubric, when we're thinking about the LEQ rubric, that the thesis statement, okay, so a push LEQ rubric, and I'm going to get my rubric up here for y'all. And so let's go ahead and have a look here. I'm going to paste a link to my, oh, it may not let me paste a link. That's right. So I'm going to go ahead and send that to Haley and let Haley paste the link here. Thank you so much for your help tonight, Haley. You're doing awesome. And calmed me back when I blanked out for just a little bit there. So anyway, we've got here that I've got the A-Push LEQ rubric. And one thing that we want to note here, do we always start off the intro with context? Now, in order to answer your question directly, note that the thesis has to be either in the introduction or conclusion. Your thesis statement must appear at the beginning or at the end. You can't get credit for a thesis statement at the end. Contextualization has no such restriction. Now, the reason that I recommend it this way is strategic. This is how, excuse me, I got some hiccups. This is how most teachers are teaching. Okay, so I would say 80 to 90% of the uses of contextualization that the AP reader is going to see are going to be at the beginning of the first paragraph, because it's just, we want contextualization there. We want to know what we're about to get into. That's why a Star Wars movie always begins with some contextualization. And so the contextualization could be that could be something that appears in the essay itself, but it's a safe bet if you're going to try contextualization to do it at the beginning to kind of set the stage. I think that stage setting point is important, and then that frees you up to focus your essay on putting your argument together. Okay, so putting your argument together, backing it up with evidence, and not having to worrying about specific evidence rather than contextualization. So with that, when I go into here, we see here that there's the thesis statement and all of that. Now, in the early colonization period, oh, oops, actually, oh, that's why there's a little gap there. Okay, because I didn't, okay, so yeah, this is actually that's funny. This is actually something of a, of a hybrid period here, or a hybrid thing here. Okay, so I had something there that I was messing with, but that's fine because I can actually write a body paragraph in front of y'all. Okay, so you see here that the Constitution, although the Constitution created a stronger central government than existed under the Articles of Confederation. So what I would do then for a paragraph is that I would go in here and I would go in here, and then from there, I would say here that, I've got, this is my first body paragraph. Okay, and then I would then make this another body paragraph. Now, we typically on an LEQ, it could be 2 or 3 body paragraphs. Okay, but we do want to note our first body paragraph is going to focus on this. Okay, so when we take a look at that, now I'm just going to go ahead and write this thing. So the Constitution, okay, the Constitution, this is my topic sentence, okay, created a stronger central government than had existed under the Articles. Okay. Now, as far as that goes, y'all note here, now this is kind of convenient because y'all may be typing your responses for this year's APUSH exam for the first time ever. Now, notice here, I need a little more context here, don't I would say that my first, if I'm going for full credit, I typically would say 3 body paragraphs. What do we need here before we can talk about the Constitution creating stronger central government? Let's talk about the Articles of Confederation. Okay. So when we're looking at this here, the Articles of Confederation, okay, so of Confederation were ratified in the, so by the states in the middle of the American Revolution. Okay, so we see here that the Articles of Confederation, that's a topic sentence, and as a result, and created a very limited central government as a result. Okay, so we see here that under the Articles, Congress had very few powers outside of foreign policy. Okay, so foreign policy powers such as, and we're going to be as specific as possible, such as maintaining an army and navy, declaring war, and making peace. Okay, so these are some powers here. Okay, in order to prevent this government from becoming a tyranny like Britain, we see here that the central government was not given the power to control trade or to tax. Okay, so we're going to see here that the Articles of Confederation, it's saying it very few powers. Then we see here that that it is it's not given the power to control trade or to tax. Okay, now the thing is, we could build in some stuff that could be contextualization or could be outside evidence. So for example, if right now I started talking about Shays Rebellion, okay, so Shays Rebellion, okay, so Shays Rebellion, which happened in Massachusetts, during the time of the Articles, convinced many American leaders that a stronger central government was necessary. Okay, was necessary. A stronger central government, and then now I can go in here, a stronger central government that would be able to assist states in keeping order was necessary. Okay, so a stronger central government that would be able to assist states in keeping order is necessary. Now, somebody could, maybe I need to develop that a little more. If I wanted that to be contextualization, I would probably need to develop that a tad bit more. But this is something that would be some, Shays Rebellion could be used as contextualization or outside evidence. So you can contextualize in your essay, but I would urge you that if you're contextualizing within the essay, remember multiple content-rich sentences. And so with that, the Constitution created a stronger central government than had existed under the Articles. Okay, so create a stronger central government than it existed under the Articles. The Commerce Clause, okay, allowed the federal government to control interstate commerce. Now we want to explain what that is, right? We don't just mention the Commerce Clause. We don't just say interstate commerce, with interstate commerce, and I would say here, which, interstate commerce between states. Even if it's something like this, where you're putting parentheses and you're defining it, you're making sure that the reader knows what you're talking about. Okay, so the Constitution also gave the federal government the power to tax, okay, the power to tax directly, okay, so the power to tax. Now so when we see that there were also, it also added new branches, okay, so branches of government with an executive branch led by a president and a federal judiciary. Okay, so judiciary. Now, so we could say that these are some things, a stronger central government than it existed under the Articles. Okay, so we would say there that is going to be, a bit, we're noting that is different. Okay, so and then I may even put a sentence like this, in all of these respects, the Constitution was different from the Articles. Okay, and then I bring in, so what I've done here is I've gone on about the Articles, then I've gone into, this is how the Constitution was different. Okay, and then I'll go into finally the last paragraph here, where I will note here that although the Constitution gave the central government more powers, okay, and created new branches of government, it was not a fundamental departure from the Articles, because it it did not get rid of federalism. Okay, it did not get rid of federalism, and it preserved many rights of the states. Okay, so I'm making a clear argumentative sentence there. Now notice that what I did here, notice what I've got here. I didn't end up writing down all this stuff here, but most of this stuff made it into my essay. And so what I'm going to say here is that the states, okay, and I'm going to note here that the states continued, okay, so the states continued to let's see, having a little bit of a blank here, but that happens to the best of us, right? Even to me during the quarantine. And so as far as that, the states continue to control commerce within their states, okay, within their states, and also, and did not experience a lot of, did not experience, still maintain control. Okay, so still maintained control over most areas dealing with the lives of their citizens. Okay, and so you could say even here you could get into in 1800 Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so one thing I could note here also is that the Bill of Rights, that's another thing that you could bring in here, that you're noting here, that the Bill of Rights, okay, is more in terms of limiting the central government's power. Okay, so what I'm going to note here, just like under the Articles, the federal government continued to control foreign policy. Okay, so that's a similarity. And then we could say something like this: in 1800, Thomas Jefferson, a staunch, a firm advocate of states' rights. Okay, so of states' rights, was elected president. Okay, which made clear, making clear, and ran the country. Was elected president. Okay, Jefferson saw the Constitution as basically the Articles on steroids. Okay, steroids, and ran the country in that manner. Okay, so in that manner. So you could say something like that. So, you can see here that Articles of so we could say ran the country in that manner. So this is a way I'm kind of going into how you could get into building contextualization into your essay. Jackson, for example, opposition to, central banking. Okay, so, opposition to central banking. Okay, so banking, which notable with Jackson, with Andrew Jackson and Jefferson. Okay, so notable with Andrew Jackson as well as Jefferson. See, I can go back here. I can, when you're taking your exam this time, hopefully y'all won't spend too much time deleting stuff. That's what I'm afraid of, and we might have to kind of go through here. Andrew Jackson as well as Jefferson. Survived through until after the Civil War. Okay, so survived, until well after the Civil War. Okay, so so with that, I'm going to note here, although I'm going to just restate my thesis without looking back at the other one, okay, without looking back at the first one. So although the Constitution created a stronger central government, okay, than had existed under the Articles Federation, the changes were not very significant, and the general federal character, so the general federal nature of the government remained the same. Okay, and that would be kind of example here of something that I would think would get, be a very strong full credit essay. Now that's the other thing. I'm not trying to show you a bare minimum full credit essay, but really how to set that up. Now it looks like I've got some questions here, so we've got a few minutes left and we'll do this. Okay, so do I recommend okay, so with that, Michael asks, so you would not recommend integrated as part of the argument or thesis defense. I think now the contextualization needs to be based on your thesis. The contextualization I provided led to the thesis. Now, when I teach contextualization, your thesis statement is here. What useful information, what useful story can you tell that will make that thesis make sense, that'll make that thesis not be an island, that'll put that thesis into context? So yeah, I would say so. Now here's the thing, Emily, as far as the outline, okay, so as far as the outline, what I've done here, now if you like outlining, I think that's fine. Now for LEQs, what I really like, I've outlined this. My boxes are basically an outline. So you see here that this was one paragraph, this was body paragraph 1, this was body paragraph 2, this was body paragraph 3. And so in making these boxes, I mean, I could have just as easily done an outline, but I think this is a little more space efficient. And also it makes you mindful of similarities and differences. And it doesn't make you put everything in a line, because when you're brainstorming, you're not necessarily thinking linearly. So I'm always thinking in terms of like, okay, this box is unique to the Articles. This box is unique to the Constitution. This box shows what they have in common. And so with that, and then when I can look at this and I can see what argument do I want to make? So I am going to make the argument that's based on, okay, do I have more for similarities or more for differences? And I get to look at this argumentatively. And that brings us to the next question regarding how do you score the complex understanding point? Now, in a comparison LEQ, the best, or in any LEQ, I look at this one here. Okay, so my favorite way to get the complex understanding point in LEQ is explaining both similarity and difference, both continuity and change, or multiple causes, or both causes and effects. And so what I've done here is I have in this setup, and that's what I like about this setup, it's not just an outline, it's making sure that I'm getting the similarities and the differences, that I'm getting the change and I'm getting the continuity, or that I'm getting multiple causes like we talked about last time, finding a cause that's outside of the prompt and saying that, okay, here is an additional cause. And that's something that is that I think is useful here. Okay, so with that, that's how I recommended to get the complex understanding point. So basically, what made this essay complex understanding is because I didn't stop after this paragraph. Okay, so this paragraph I could have made like a good, 3 or 4, maybe 5. Because I showed some differences between the Articles and the Constitution. But then here, I'm making a more nuanced argument. One of the things that we see here, we see nuance. And when we talk about nuance, then we're saying that it's not just a clear cut, black and white, yes or no kind of thing. Okay. And so that's what we're getting into there. Now, as far as that goes, I've got one more thing, ladies and gentlemen, that the Bill of Rights Institute has an essay contest that they're going to be doing, that they've got. This is through April 15th. It's not like you got anything better to do, right? So, if you're looking for something to do and you might be able to, you could win some money as well. Okay. So you could win some money doing this. Let me go ahead and show you something here. I'm going to share my screen so you can see something about this. Is the We the Students Scholarship Essay Contest, and I assume that Haley's going to put a little something into the comments so that y'all can get some more information so that you can get a good link there. And so let's go ahead and just take a look at this. $19,000 in potential cash prizes. So you can go to wethestudents.org. And the essay question is, what does civil discourse mean to you? Okay. And the thing is, if you're writing for AP and you're learning how to write an LEQ, I think that that's something that really, you can write an LEQ style essay, go into what civil discourse is, go into what civil discourse is not. What are some ways to promote civil discourse? What are some potential threats to civil discourse in this country? So I think that this would be a great way to, you could even throw in some examples from U.S. history. So I think this could be a great way for you to supplement your preparation for the APUSH exam and also possibly win some cash prizes. It looks like here, first place. Now the $15,000. First place gets a $7,500 prize, and then there are 5 runner-up prizes with $1,500 each. So that's something that I think would be a very good thing. Now, also first place, you get a scholarship to the Bill of Rights Institute's Constitutional Academy this summer. So that's something that now make sure the deadline's April 15th. Make sure y'all get your responses in. Okay. So make sure that that's the case, that you're doing that. And let me go ahead and make sure that we don't have any other questions. Yeah, the top prize is $7,500. So as far as that goes, I think we've gotten into the complex understanding and all of that, how to score all of those points, how to use evidence, topic sentences, and then I will clean this up a little bit, get this to Haley, and then when the video is posted, we'll make sure to put this in the video description so that you can have access to what I created here tonight. And thank y'all so much for coming tonight for our third session. And we'll have another session on Thursday where we'll also look at early national America. Think about your questions. Let's think about anything from the American Revolution to the election of 1800. Those of you who are coming here and joining us every time we're here, we'll be back Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, and we will focus again on early national America. Come with your questions. Let's maybe focus a little more on content on the next one if y'all want to. So with that, it is always a pleasure.